At Info Permian, we've been very fortunate. A little over a year ago, many people thought the idea of the Permian becoming a major AI and data center hub was speculative. I know we were definitely staring into the abyss and eating glass there for a couple of years talking to data centers. But today, it's a reality. In our mission to help establish the Permian Basin as one of America's premier power and AI infrastructure corridors, we've seen a real moment and real momentum shift here in the past year. So what have we been able to achieve? We executed a long-term surplus lease tied to a 400 megawatt power project that will bring new generation on the grid. We entered into an agreement involving a premier property that is being acquired by a respected real estate infrastructure investor pursuing a gigawatt scale. And we continue to advance multiple data center opportunities across the Permian while building pathways for our initial 250 megawatt project. We have great partnerships with IPPs, EPCs, local power infrastructure groups, capable of delivering generation in constrained markets. But these accomplishments is not what excites us the most. It's not the power, the capital, but it's the people. We're meeting entrepreneurs, operators, engineers, investors, ranchers, oil and gas executives, utility leaders, public officials who've all chosen collaboration over division. People who understand that AI infrastructure is not just a technology issue, it's an American competitiveness and national security issue. And to understand why this moment matters, we need to really appreciate the scale of what's happening around us. We are witnessing one of the largest infrastructure investment cycles in American history, not a technological cycle, an infrastructure cycle. This year alone, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and Meta are expected to spend $7 billion in AI infrastructure. And I want you guys to think about that. $700 billion. In 1 year, $700 billion, that's 2% of the entire United States economy. And unlike the railroads, rural electrification, interstate highway systems, or the telecom boom of the 90s, this investment isn't being driven by governments. It's being driven by some of the most profitable companies in American history that got the cash. And most of them do have it. So here's the reality. AI doesn't run on just venture capital. It runs on electricity and bankable demand. So what does that mean? All of these GPUs, all these data centers, they're converting this electron into intelligence. So according to the International Energy Agency, our demand is supposed to double here in the next 5 years. So for the first time in generations, technology is becoming one of the largest consumers of energy in the world. Reliable, dispatchable power, scalable power, and increasingly the search is leading them into places like Permian Basin. So what is that? Why does that matter? We have the pipelines, the fiber, power infrastructure, industrial services, water systems. I would argue that we also have a workforce. Because while much of the country is trying to figure out how to build the infrastructure required for AI, the Permian has already spent decades and tens of billions building it. Now, the same foundation is becoming America's greatest advantage in the AI race. Because AI no longer is a software story, it's an infrastructure story. And I believe the Permian Basin has earned a seat at the table. So the winners of the AI era will not simply be those with the best models, they will be those with the best power. And that brings me today to today's panel. We have leaders on the stage who are helping define what the future looks like. And first, I'd like to introduce Nate Franklin from Pacifico Energy. I met Nate in Las Vegas a couple of years ago at a time when many people were still debating whether natural gas belonged in the AI conversation. Nate was one of the first major independent power producers willing to stand on stage and say what many now recognize as a reality. There's no AI revolution without an energy revolution. Today, Pacifico's Gigawatt Ranch project represents one of the most ambitious power developments in America, with more than 5 gigawatts of dedicated off-grid generation plans and pathway towards 7.65 gigawatts. Nate, thank you so much for your vision, your investment, and on behalf of the Permian Basin, thanks for being here, man. Also, thanks for talking to this small, crazy West Texas kid at Yada. You didn't have to say hello without who you are. Next, we got Bill. Bill, here in the center, he needs very little introduction. He has become one of the most respected voices in AI infrastructure and is the founder of and CEO of IgniteGTM, the company behind the AI Infrastructure Summit, one of the fastest growing events in the AI and cloud ecosystem. Through the Ignite and InfraCore platform, Bill has, Bill has built one of the most important connective tissues between hyperscalers, cloud providers, NeoClouds, infrastructure investors, AI startups, and the operators building the future of compute. If you've been anywhere near the infrastructure conversation in San Francisco over the last few years, there's a chance that Bill has been at the center of it. Bill, thank you so much for joining us. And finally, last but not least, Miss Mercy Mann. Mercy, you're one of my favorite people in the industry. You're one of the most respected deal makers in AI infrastructure, and despite everything you've accomplished, you're still one of the most down to earth and genuinely enjoyable people to work with. You got super upset with me when I was coming to see Bill in San Francisco and didn't call you. And within the hour, I was at a happy hour at downtown with you. And we sat there for 4 hours in Colorado. So a lot of fun. Mercy's spent more than a decade helping build one of the most respected data center platforms in the world. When she joined Align Data Centers, it was an emerging challenger. Today, Align has grown into a platform with approximately 5 gigawatts of capacity across more than 50 campuses throughout the Americas. And last year, that journey culminated into what many consider the most significant transaction in the history of the data center industry, a roughly $40 billion acquisition led by a consortium that included BlackRock, MGX, Microsoft, NVIDIA, and xAI. The transaction is widely regarded as the largest data center acquisition ever completed. Really appreciate you guys sitting here because everyone who came to see Case, uh, Mercer's company is 7 times more valuable. So just so you guys know who the real star in the room is today. If you've ever wondered what it looks like to help build a category defining company, to an industry leader, you're looking at one of the people who helped make it happen. Mercy, thank you so much for joining us today. Please join me in welcoming my panelists with a round of applause. Now, would you guys just do a quick intro? 30 seconds to a minute. We'll start with you, Mercy.
Well, thank you again for bringing me here, Jose. I will tell everyone we met at the Data Center Dynamics conference in New York City 6 months ago, and had it was one of my favorite random meetings. I learned so much about this part of Texas, and I said, "Take me here. I want to come see it myself." So we do a lot of business in Texas. We're headquartered in Plano, but I have not been out here myself, and so I'm really happy to be here, and I'm really excited about what is to come for this part of Texas.
Hi, Bill Berry, Ignite GTM out of Silicon Valley. As Jose mentioned earlier, we run conferences ourselves, AI Infra Summit, that we do twice a year in partnership with Supermicro, AMD, we do roadshows with NVIDIA. So today, I'm here in West Texas. It's such a cool ecosystem that you guys have here, and the importance of ecosystems, as we know here in Silicon Valley, it really drives everything, right? And just to see this kind of concentration of all the industries coming together here in the Permian is pretty amazing. And I'm hoping to work with Jose, Pete, and the team here to continue to build a bridge between the sell side, which is this side of the world, and the buy side, which is the world that I live in Silicon Valley, San Francisco. So good to be here.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dave Franklin with Pacifico Energy. Just a little bit about our company, our IPG. We've done close to 2 gigawatts of projects. We've done actually a lot. U.S. company, but we got our big start in Asia. We've done a lot of renewable projects in Asia to date. And yeah, we're doing what we call, true behind the meter projects in the U.S. And a couple of years ago, we saw the demand for data center power, and came out to, we thought, well, these projects are going to get really big and people are going to need a lot of power in one spot, and we're better to do that than West Texas. And so we came out here a couple years ago and started siting projects, and I can get more into it later, but just right when I came here, I knew this is a very special place. I mean, compared to Japan, where we're trying to build solar on just very open for business. And I mean, I could go down the list of like why just like it was like Millennium, I don't know, I can't remember the energy development. Wow, we got this place is going to be big. The last couple of years it's proven out what we thought it was going to.
Awesome. Nate is a believer in gas. He was in California trying to build power for a mall. Couldn't figure it out. Called the gas company and they had him rolling. So he now understands and saw firsthand how natural gas can be leveraged for these types of projects. So we're going to get started with some questions, and then we'll open it up to you guys to ask. A very special panel today. Everyone wants a gigawatt, but nobody wants to wait 5 years. If you were advising a hyperscaler today, what matters more? Securing long-term grid power or deploying behind the meter quickly and scaling over time? How are the most successful developers balancing speed versus performance? And I'll talk to you, Mercy, because you've been involved in a couple of these deals already.
So there's a few more considerations that I just want to bring up to start. So for us, we have to, our typical campus size up until a year ago was, 488 megawatts critical, across 4 buildings. As this as the AI workloads have come to us, and what the size of the campuses are obviously growing, we're having to look for, obviously larger parcels, and we've all heard about the community pushback, so places where we actually can build. I think the transition from grid, as again, we've talked about this a little bit already, but the transition from grid only to bridge to grid to now behind the meter permanently, that has all happened in the last 6 months. And depending on the customer, they're somewhere along that journey. So it's still very much in in flux. And so for a developer like Aligned and all of my colleagues out there, we have to solve for multiple customers. And so we're still at this point where part of our business still needs that grid connection. We have our lenders looking for us to still have that grid connection. But then we also have a set of customers that are saying, we don't care about grid connection. So we're in the middle right now, trying to kind of make a lot of people happy. And it's hard because they have different needs. And obviously building speed is the most important, as we all know, especially for the AI Frontier Labs and the NeoClouds. That's the group of companies that I work with on a daily basis, so the Anthropics, the CoreWeaves, OpenAI, Lambda, and so they're looking for speed first, wherever that is. It's still very much a U.S. Requirement. There's a little bit going to Europe right now, but we have a large portfolio in Latin America, and that still hasn't really been where the AI workloads want to go yet. So finding somewhere in the U.S. That has that speed to power and that scale. And the other thing that we're from a developer's perspective, yes, we have the power, but we also have to build, we have to go vertical. And all of that the supply chain to support that has not necessarily, although we have a huge supply chain, it was not turning up 500 megawatt buildings at a time. We were more 12, 24 megawatts per phase. And now for the AI workloads, we need to actually turn up, for the training, for the inference it can be smaller, but we're being asked to turn up 65 megawatts data halls instead of 6 megawatt data halls. So there's a lot of transition for us on the building side too. And so when you're also building at that scale, managing a construction site, the amount of people that are there safely, and to turn those sites up very quickly. I mean, we're dealing with this challenge across the board. And so power is obviously the first thing we need to figure out, but very quickly after that is how do we get vertical at the pace that these customers want to go. And so that brings us to obviously the labor issue, and that's a big conversation and something that Aligned and all of our colleagues are working on. So you see a lot of us adding a lot more modular, skidded product to our building designs, and that's really just obviously for speed and for we all know what's going on in Abilene. We're building in Abernathy, 7 several hundred megawatt site. So we're finding the labor to support that scale has been really challenging, and so all of us are using modular as well to support that fast growth.
Fantastic. Yeah, it sounds like as the location where electrons are available, the capital stack that underwrites that capital asset begins to consider grid versus behind the meter and getting comfortable with the evolving demands of new GPU designs and the evolving locations and assets that are being underwritten. You're having to solve multiple issues both from the capital side and the operational side.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I spend a decent amount of time with the customers, but as well as with our finance team and the challenges that they're trying to solve with our lenders. Honestly, there's still a preference for core or core adjacent markets. So we're having those conversations to, I think that side of the house has to start to see that the customers are pushing us to these new locations and making sure that we have support from our lenders to build also at this scale in a brand new market or not a market at all.
Got it.
Is a big challenge that we are working through.
That's very insightful. I think with that being the lens and kind of the 5,000 feet view of the considerations, it really brings me to my next question that I think Nate and Bill are very qualified to answer. Many of these sites, they look really good on paper, but very few of them become operational AI campuses. I know a lot of people here are tired of seeing press releases. What are the top reasons large-scale data center sites fail during diligence, and what separates the projects to what actually is being built?
Yeah, so we a lot of our conversations are really firmly in the buy side in the Silicon Valley, San Francisco, and University and I had this conversation last week, where we have to merge all these cultures. You have somebody that's in their late 20s, just graduated, just raised a bunch of money, and they're asking for a gigawatt data center somewhere, right? Which is just
and they don't have, and they're not investment grade.
They're not, yeah, and they're not investment grade, right? They don't have enough white hairs in their head to be investment grade. But anyways, and then so, but that I would say that was a conversation 2 years ago, and then the last year, a lot of the conversations that we were in the middle of was let's take a look at a few hundred gigawatts here and there, and then now that's transforming over the past 3 to 4 months, because time to market, no matter what, is going to be the key metric that we're all anchored around. Is everybody's looking for, do we have 2 megawatts, 5 megawatts? Can we get that available today? Okay on modular, okay on behind the meter, right? And you're seeing a lot of this shift too. So that's definitely an interesting shift over the past few years. Now, your question is, what are some of the problems? We saw some of those problems because it is a world that we don't understand, and when I'm talking about kind of the greater whole for the Silicon Valley side. If you take a look at what infrastructure means for the AI workloads, right? Let's take a look at really big layers. There's the land and power layer that evolves in months and years. And then we go up into the rack layer, the technology layer that evolves in months, right? Jensen's releasing new GPUs out every year. The infrastructure can't even keep up. And then there's the model layer, the application layers, a lot of those things evolve in weeks and days. So then if we're trying to serve, the puck is moving that fast, and we're trying to build this in massive infrastructure to keep up, how do we translate that into actual deals in progress? And I think that's a lot of the challenges. Not only in just logistical timing, supply chains, moving up the layers, we also talked about last week about the cultural differences. We're all speaking English, but we're talking different languages at every single layer, right? And I sit a lot at the table as an advisor, just kind of watching this ping pong match of everybody just wanting different things and trying to find that middle ground so then we can move something forward. So I feel like if we really take a look at why do most deals not move forward, a lot of it is because we're just not attuned to talking to each other through the layers, and we do need to do that. And that's why ecosystem is important. That's why conferences like this and the ones that we hold in Silicon Valley is really important to be able to merge those conversations together.
Awesome. Yeah, I think you speak specifically to the changes of the tech and also the cultural differences. which one thing I really appreciate having really influential people both, globally, where Nate's built in Japan, gigawatts. He's come to Cali, you guys are in SF, here in West Texas, speaking to us where we put our differences aside. Just this morning, China announced $200 billion in AI infrastructure, where we as a nation have to understand that we have to put our differences aside in order to invest in technology that is going to protect our national security, but also enable us to have these efficiencies where, as Case mentioned, he's paying negative prices to get gas out of the Permian. Lots of midstream companies are building billions of dollars of infrastructure to get gas to Arizona. Why are we not doing it here, right? So a big part of what we're doing here is to bring all of us who have a common interest in the United States national security to build these projects. So with that kind of being the narrative and kind of what our intent is here, Nate, what do you think some of these cultural challenges are, and specifically some of the mismatches across the capital stack, right? Because you're a land developer, you've done a deal with the hyperscaler, you're looking to scale more beyond gigawatt ranch. What are you seeing as like the biggest disconnects now when it comes to doing healthy deal structure, both from like the capital stack side or just culturally?
Yeah, and that's a good question. I think the industry needs to evolve. I almost see, like we always talk about as data center, right? Like, I see what's going on now. It's almost like it's an AI factory, which is like, you could say it's like, this is different than a data center. What kind of like what everyone thinks of as a data center in the past, right? Like just the scale that it needs to be built at and the technology. It was interesting. I actually was in New York last week and sat in on one of the roadshow presentations from SpaceX. And Gwen Shotwell and the CFO, in our presentation, they talked more about AI compute than they did about launching rockets, like what SpaceX was doing. And they actually made that distinction that there's really not data centers what we're doing. This is AI compute. And it really reminds me of when we developed offshore wind in Japan and built out that platform like in the late 20 teens. And when we were doing it, you're trying to find the engineers. It was really hard to find that offshore wind engineering talent. And you think, well, let's just go get the onshore wind guys, and then we'll teach them like offshore wind. But it was almost the opposite. You don't want to start with an offshore because you almost have to give them a little botany to how the technology works, and then do offshore wind because like it looks like they're really similar, but like onshore wind and offshore wind are completely different technologies. And so I think a little bit that reminds me of what we're seeing now in just that, like, I think on the last panel, the guy presenting Bill, he mentioned, like, well, in the data center industry, 10, something's new if it's 10 years old, or so he has some comment like that. Like, that we can't think like that anymore, to be successful in this industry. And I think that's why you see, who's, in the kind of AI infrastructure space, like who's really kind of getting a lot of success, like Bitcoin miners, more, I'd say, than like a lot of the actual legacy data center developers, just because of the speed that they're moving and kind of doing things like new. So, yeah, so when you talk about like culture, like, yeah, I think the culture kind of has to change, like the mindset has to change, like, perfect example, like what we've all been talking about, today in Power Lab. Historically, yeah, you're building a data center, you go get a will serve letter from the utility, after a year or whatever, the utility has the power for you. That's how it's always been done. And I think everyone's kind of like banging their head against the wall, thinking like that's how it has to be done. But at this scale, you can't do it that way anymore. Like, just to get kind of in context, when you go and tell the utility I want like a 500 megawatt load interconnect or a gigawatt load interconnect, you know how many 500 megawatt single load interconnects have been in the U.S. in the last like 60 years? It's like a dozen. In like 60 years, and they've all been like mostly pump hydro stations that are like pumped by the utility. So it's like it's just like totally new. Just for an example, we went and refiled an interconnect with one of the co-ops, and their tariff, there's different levels, right? Like if you're at this size, you're in this tariff, or at this size, you're in this tariff. It capped out the mega large load interconnects for the utility starts at 2 megawatts. So just to kind of give you like the mindset of what interconnects have been, so now we're going to say, well, 500 megawatts of power. So my point is like, when you talk culture, like, we gotta like look at a new way to do it. And I think if we're going to serve like this industry, you know, we're going to have success. So I think we're starting to see that as what we're talking about in the last 6 months. I think the customers and kind of the whole industry are starting to kind of realize like, okay, we got to do this like a little bit different, which is really, you know, what we call private grid. I know a lot of people say behind the meter, and not people who are rumorize what I've talked about this before, but you know, it's really behind the meter. We've done behind the meter projects. That's you have utility interconnect, you're developing power generation behind utility meters. You're kind of serving all those. You're not drawing from the grid. This is different. This is like what I like calling private grid. Like when you say I want to connect to the grid, this is going to be off grid. This isn't off grid. Like what you know when you're talking about doing 500 megawatts or a gigawatt of like co-located generation. This is like we're building a private grid with all the technology and redundancy and reliability that you get from utility. We're you know building this bespoke for this one customer, and so I think yeah, I think you know going forward, like we're going to see it more and more. That's kind of the way things are done, and everyone's talking about well, it'll be a bridge to when utility comes. Like I think that's going to change too. I think these projects are going to get connected. They're going to see that wow, this works really well. I haven't had you know one outage in 3 or 4 you know the 3 years since it's been operating, and then all of a sudden now the utility study comes back and they want $1 billion, you know, $1 billion to connect me, you know, for further upgrades. Whatever we need that, like I'm just gonna keep doing, you know, this project. So my guess is kind of that's how it's gonna develop. Is everyone gonna get more and more comfortable with the works?
Yeah, I love what you're saying. I think if you put things into perspective, it's only been 20 times in the history of the United States that we put 500 megawatts on the grid. And that's the average size of the data center projects that we're seeing, right? So we're seeing really an industrial shift. And when you talk about innovation and collaboration, tech, you know, a lot of these tech funds and NeoClouds that are getting funded, they're used to software and tokenization and moving fast and breaking things quickly. Whereas on the infrastructure side, you know, it's really hard to iterate. You know, you just look at what we've done with horizontal drilling here to produce all this oil. It was really a hardware innovation and process innovation that we did from 2010 all the way to 2017 to really figure out how to produce shale. That was a 7-year industry technology curve change where we're seeing a lot of innovation happening a lot faster, right? So we see a lot of impatient landowners saying, hey, you're supposed to buy me out. Wait a second, we're planning billions of dollars of infrastructure that has so many stakeholders involved to make a decision, right? So I think the point you made specifically to innovation, understanding different industries, people working together is going to be the bottleneck that I see the most, right? But I do want to ask the rest of you guys the question, as a final question before we open it up to the public, is what would be the biggest bottleneck in ag infrastructure growth? Power generation, transmission, equipment, supply chain, workforce, capital, permitting, or something else? And specifically, how does West Texas fit into this national build-out story? What risk is the industry underestimating today? So we talked a little bit about the human capital and the innovation side and the cultural pieces, but specifically, you know, from the assets, the dollars, the infrastructure, what are the bottlenecks? What are people missing, and how does the Permian fit in?
So I'll just bring up one of the challenges that, from a line perspective, again, for my other large wholesale co-location colleagues as well, we are being asked to do these gigawatt scale projects, and we have to, we're being asked by the larger companies as well as some of the smaller NeoClouds not to do a gigawatt, but several hundred megawatts, and the credit situation for this group of customers that have the most demand is they don't have investment grade credit. And so that's what we spend a lot of time trying to, or I spend time, especially with the smaller NeoClouds, coaching them through what they're going to need to do to essentially be able to be a customer of ours, right? And so there's a lot of trade-offs that they have to make in their business to get that credit wrapper from an NVIDIA or a Google. And so those are hard decisions that they have to make as a business. How much do they want to give up to get that wrapper? So we spend a lot of time on that. With the larger providers, they're also thinking about that. And I would just say power is obviously a huge bottleneck. That's what we're all here to talk about. But then we have to have that credit record. And then when you're talking about that at a gigawatt scale, that's a pretty costly endeavor for that customer. So that has been creating a lot of friction and slowing the deals down. It's just not something that you're going to see like out here. It's what I'm dealing with like behind the scenes with the customers.
Makes sense. And I think a lot of these assets and their financial liabilities, whether they're options or straight up buyouts, can impact that. Bill, what about you? You know every NeoCloud, and they're trusting you with building community and providing solutions. What are the biggest bottlenecks you see, and how's the Permian fit into that?
Yeah, bottlenecks. I feel like what you said resonated because I feel like I'm just untangling the balls, spaghetti strings every single time we have a conversation about moving forward. I think a lot of the bottlenecks is maybe just education, and it's more on the buy side, clouds. When they want to do vertical integration, it's like that's kind of one of the red flags that I kind of pump the brakes on, because a lot of these guys, I mean, I use this analogy, and I said, like, if you're to get GPUs and you're going to stand these up, you're in the Ferrari renting business, right? Very expensive, but then just focus on that. You want to go vertically integrated just so you can have your own power. It's like trying to get into building skyscrapers. So then a lot of these folks that try to drive into the conversation is, what business are you in? If it's a time and market play, I can tell you that if you're trying to open up a Ferrari business and a skyscraper at the same time, you're probably not going to get very far. And the market's going to move so fast to the point where you're just going to be running around in circles for 2 to 3 years. And what that does also, it has a compounding effect, because then it creates more noise in the market. So we do see a lot of brokers, a lot of middlemen, and kind of just running around in the same circles, and that's creating a lot of confusion for the true buyers. And I have a lot of the advice I give is talk to the folks like Mercy or Nate, to really, if you are interested in that, making sure that you have the capital support to build that skyscraper, you have the resources to do that. Your Ferrari business is intact and it's monetizing, right? And take those in steps. So I think there's going to be, we all talk about in this AI cycle, is it a bubble that's going to pop? It's not. But there's going to be a big correction for those guys that are running around in circles for a few years, right? Trying to do everything for everybody. So I feel like that's kind of our role, and just being able to advise clients, basically stay in their lane, focus on time to market, focus on what you're really, really good at, and then partner well with folks like Mercy and Nate to be able to build out the rest of your strategy.
That's great. We really appreciate that sober perspective. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. The other thing that's happening is within the customer base, these are customers that within the hyperscalers, they were used to buying off the grid. Closer, sorry. And so there's a huge talent and learning curve. They're having to hire more people that have more experience with power generation. So that's not necessarily where they have the most, at least on the folks that were going out and buying capacity, leasing capacity, they didn't necessarily have as much of a power background. So there's a learning curve there going up within the hyperscalers. Within the AI frontier labs and the NeoClouds, some of them have never even leased data center space before. So now they're trying to learn how to lease or buy or build and do power. And so there's a lot of education that's, I would just say for everyone here, have some patience and be willing to educate, because the buyers are being hit with a lot right now, and they're having to make really fast decisions. And these are obviously very expensive projects that they're taking on. And so at least what I feel like my job at this point for most of these new companies is to educate and to connect them with people that can really help them, because they're under a lot of pressure to go faster than our industry ever scaled before. And specifically within the AI Frontier Lab groups, these are teams of like 5 people trying to grow 10 gigawatts in a year. It's a lot.
Yeah.
And these are still just people trying to do a good job.
Yeah, no, I think it's very refreshing to me. You just sold a big portion of your business for $40 billion to some of the best companies, and you've seen it. So having a sober mind, educating folks on that side is really refreshing, especially too with.
We started as the disruptor, so that's the other thing right now. Like that everyone was, someone already said that our industry doesn't really love innovation. So there is a lot of cultural things you got to work through to get new ideas through. But we're at a point where we need it, and this is where some of the new developers are really answering the call and listening to what the customers need. And I heard one of the largest customers in our space say, "I'm going to teach these developers what they need to serve me." And so I think there's also that. I think all of us can take a lesson in that, and for Align, we can look back at our roots of being the innovator and the disruptor, and what do we need to do next to be a disruptor again.
Cool.
And so that's what's really exciting about coming here and starting to integrate having the power problem and opportunity be the thing that we need to innovate.
Yeah, look, I think that we're still in the first inning of the AI infrastructure space. I think the difference between what we saw in the .com is that the companies that are doing this are actually very well capitalized, and it's going to be a while before we see it bust. We'll have more of a direction. But Nate, I know you've been super patient with the microphone, and you have a lot of insight. Oh, I think okay, good. Specifically from the development side, 1.5 gigawatts in Japan, several hundred megawatts in the United States. You've seen, electron development, and you build infrastructure at scale. Really from your perspective, and 7.65 gigawatts of permits, where you actually are putting money on the table, having the largest, power platform in the history of the United States on private grid. Like, what an incredible thing for you to be trying to do and doing. And from your perspective in the discussion about hyperscalers, what do you see are the bottlenecks, and how is the Permian going to help?
Yeah, I think, look, I think there's a lot of I know you have a list of all the permits and the equipment, there's a lot of, it's all bottlenecks, and the thing about it is, building, we can talk about, this huge market, and, this is a great place to, build these projects and all these, positive things, but on the flip side, building large infrastructure projects is, really difficult. It's really difficult, and there's, so many, it's you're just with any business, you're just putting out fires constantly. So you have obstacle after obstacle you're trying to overcome along the way. And I really like what Bill said about how someone that jumps into it wants to do it all. That's gonna be tough to be. I mean, I don't want to throw anyone or teach on that because they have a big idea to go for it. One of our things is we just want to focus on the power, right? Because I know the building the data center is a whole other thing, and there's so much nuance to that and things you need to learn along the way. So that's why we love to, partner with company like Mercy's and have them, who's really good at it and doing it. You do the data center, we're trying to do the power, so and the site development. But I think to build a big infrastructure is really hard and takes a long time. And to be successful in this, it costs more, by the way. So you're trying to do something that's really hard on a very expedited schedule, and then pulling in capital for it. And there's so many pieces that are trying to pull together at once, and every single piece, nothing goes through. I'll say that. So
Yeah, makes sense. You guys, we have again the gentleman building the largest project in the nation. We have Bill, who I think is very humble and one of the greatest influencers in the AI business in San Francisco, and Mercy, who needs no introduction, having built tens of billions of dollars worth of co-locator, who just sold a big portion for $40 billion. They're all super excited. They're all the voices in the San Francisco side advocating for our community. So with that being the end of our panel, thank y'all so much, and let's give them a round of applause.